The British have been known for many things over the past few centuries. Unfortunately, delicious and flavorful food is not something that they have a reputation for. And to be honest, I understand where the criticism comes from. A lot of British food is pretty bland in general. Please don't hate me, British viewers. I also do want to remind new viewers that my dad is British, so I did grow up eating a lot of this stuff. Whenever I said we didn't have any food in the house, my dad would always go tell me to eat beans on toast or a bowl of Weetabix. So I promise I do have some experience in the British cuisine area. I'm not a complete newbie ever since moving to London a few months ago. But regardless of the cuisine's reputations, there really are a ton of amazing British dishes to try while visiting here in the UK. I mean, when you travel, it's part of the full experience to try all the local foods and immerse yourself fully in the culture. So let's take a look at these must-try British foods for your next trip to the UK, and stick around to the end to see what the best British food is, in my opinion. First up, we have a popular one, fish and chips. Obviously, it's very self-explanatory. It's fried fish and French fries, which they call chips over here. This is probably the main British meal that we have over in the States. Like any British pub that you go to back in the US will 100% have fish and chips on the menu. Something new to me though, ever since moving here, is that they are served with mushy peas, which again are exactly as described. Sorry, not a fan. Tastes awful, tastes like unseasoned baby food. Can't get on board with the mushy peas, but I do love a good fish and chips plate. Another popular one is a full English breakfast. Emphasis on the word full, because not all restaurants do the full version. They might try to skimp you on some things. A full English breakfast should consist of bacon slices, they're called rashers here, sausages, the same style from like bangers and mash, which I'll talk about shortly, eggs, which are usually fried, but you can get them in other ways if you prefer, mushrooms, baked beans, grilled tomatoes, black pudding, which is not pudding, not the same consistency as what we're thinking of, but the same consistency as Yorkshire pudding, which I'll talk more about a little bit later, buttered toast, and of course a cup of English breakfast tea, which is black tea served with milk and sugar. So yeah, it's a lot of food. I've heard there are some regional variations on this English breakfast, which I've never tried, but the full Scottish has potato scones and the square Lorne sausage. A full Welsh breakfast has laver bread, which honestly I'm not even sure what that is. And the full Irish breakfast will most likely swap out the black pudding for the white pudding. Next, since I just mentioned it, we have bangers and mash, which is simply sausages with mashed potatoes and covered in onion gravy. The best way I can describe it is something similar to like a bratwurst. It's a really thick sausage with a casing that gives it a nice crunch when you bite into it. But it's not a bratwurst. A banger is actually a blanket term for all sausages made in the UK. The term banger was supposedly coined during the First World War, when the combination of cheap ingredients used to fill the sausage casings would explode in the pan. So it's traditionally thought of as a working class meal, but you can find some gourmet versions made with specialty sausages and a mash made with some root vegetables like carrots. The next one might be hard for some Americans because we typically think of pies as a dessert and very sweet, but the Brits love their savory pies, and they have so many variations. They have shepherd's pie, steak and kidney pie, steak and ale pie, chicken and gravy pie, you name it, they probably have it. The only thing I can tell Americans is think of a chicken pot pie, how it's flaky and buttery on the outside and then filled with chicken, gravy, and veggies. It's exactly like that, but a million different variations, typically served with mashed potatoes and gravy. Surprise, surprise. I've always been a fan of a chicken pot pie, but ever since living in London and having consistent cold and gloomy weather, my love and appreciation for pies has grown so much. So now I truly understand the meaning of comfort food. The next dish has similar ingredients, but with a twist. It's called toad in the hole, the ultimate British comfort food, perfect for a chilly day. It's basically Yorkshire pudding batter that you bake sausages into, so then the sausages kind of get covered by this like biscuity, battery type thing. Usually it's covered in onion gravy, of course, and veggies. I'd say it's pretty similar to pigs in a blanket back in the States, but just a tad different in consistency. Next, we have Yorkshire pudding, which is one of those traditional British foods that is not at all what foreigners expect it to be. It's not sweet, and it's not what we would traditionally think of as a pudding consistency, like more liquid. It's a savory pastry served alongside Sunday roast, which I'll talk more about in my next point. The best way I can describe it for Americans is something similar to a biscuit, not a British biscuit, which is like what we think of as a cookie, like an actual biscuit you'd bake and you'd put butter on, but slightly different. I remember the first time my dad made Sunday roast for us and he was telling us everything that he was making, and all of us were so excited for the pudding dessert. So we thought. And when it never came, we were so disappointed and we were like, what happened to the pudding? He said, you ate it, and held up this biscuit looking thing, and it was a very disappointing moment for all of us. Now, since I mentioned it a few times, let's talk about the Sunday roast, a long-standing British tradition and arguably the UK's favorite meal. You can't walk more than a few blocks that have restaurants in them without seeing at least one sign advertising for their Sunday roast. It's honestly just as described. It's a roasted meat, similar to what a lot of Americans would think of as like a crock pot roast, but it has a ton of side dishes. It's typically served with roast potatoes, stuffing, veggies, and Yorkshire pudding that I just talked about. People believe the origins go back to the Industrial Revolution times, where people would throw some meat in the oven with, potatoes, veggies, cooking slowly, go to church, and then when they come back, the meal would be ready for them. But who knows if that's actually true or not. Next up is a Cornish pasty, and the most similar thing I can think of is like an empanada. It's a pastry packet stuffed with a meat filling, traditionally beef, potato, and onion, so it's easy to eat on the go. Next, we have sticky toffee pudding, which is not what we would typically think of as pudding. It's a moist sponge cake made with finely chopped dates, covered in a toffee sauce, and often served with vanilla custard or vanilla ice cream. So again, not the typical pudding consistency we would think of back in the States, but it is a dessert and it's sweet, not like black pudding or Yorkshire pudding, which are both savory. Next, we have a lovely British dessert typically served after Christmas dinner, trifle. It has a layer of sponge fingers at the bottom that have been soaked in alcohol, then a layer of jelly with fresh fruit, then a custard layer, and then it's topped with whipped cream. It always reminds me of that episode of Friends where Rachel makes a trifle for Thanksgiving dessert and puts beef in it on accident. We all know and probably love this next one, scones, a delightful British snack typically served alongside tea. We typically think of scones as being sweet, similar to like a muffin, like a chocolate chip scone or a blueberry scone, those types of flavors, but they also do have savory scones here, like cheese scones. This next one isn't an actual meal, more so a spread like peanut butter or jelly. It's called Marmite, and the company literally ran an ad campaign saying you either love it or you hate it. I absolutely hate it. My dad absolutely loved it growing up, and I never understood it. The smell alone is strong enough to make you not even want to take a bite, in my opinion. It's a strongly flavored spread made from concentrated brewer's yeast, and it's like a thick, sticky, blackish brownish color. I honestly don't know. I guess the slogan is true. You either hate it or you love it. Guess you have to try it and see for yourself. Now, these last two I have not personally tried, but I had to include them, starting with the Scotch egg. Now for me, I think this is a bit of a strange creation, but they love their Scotch eggs here. At every market you go to, there will be at least one stall selling Scotch eggs, and people will be buying them. Essentially, it's a hard-boiled egg wrapped in sausage meat, covered in breadcrumbs, and then deep fried until golden and crispy. So it honestly doesn't sound terrible. I mean, anything that's deep fried is usually pretty good, but I'm not a huge egg person to begin with, so I'm not sure if it's really for me, but I guess I have to try and see for myself. And the last one, now I'm only including this because it's the national dish of Scotland. Haggis, Neeps, and Tatties. I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. Haggis is traditionally made of a mix of sheep heart, liver, and lungs, mixed with oats, onions, and spices, all boiled in a sheep's stomach. Neeps are turnips and tatties are potatoes. So no disrespect at all, but does not sound appetizing to me. And I lived in China for a year where I experienced some of the craziest food dishes I've ever seen or tasted, but I thought I had to include it on here to include Scotland and in case it sounded appealing to anyone or they were just curious. So what's the best British food? Obviously that's subjective and that's hard to answer. For me, it's fish and chips, and I'd love to hear what your answer is. And if I'm forgetting any of your favorite British dishes, please comment down below so I can make sure I try them for myself, and so anyone watching the video can have more British foods to try on their trip to the UK. Now let's talk about reasons why I moved to the UK and why I think you should too.